A chain snapped tight and dragged a girl forward across cold stone. She hit her knees, hard. The iron cuff bit into her wrist and drew a thin line of blood. A woman's voice barked an order and rough hands shoved her deeper into the hall. She did not cry out. She would not give them that. Above her, on a raised floor, a man sat in a wooden chair with wheels, and he watched. Firelight caught the scars along the backs of his hands. Nobody in that hall expected him to move. Nobody expected him to matter. Her name was Alara Voss, 19 years old, sold to settle a debt she never made. She lifted her chin and looked straight at the broken king they called Kellen Thornwood. What he did in the next 10 seconds would silence every wolf in that room. Stay with me on this one. The chain that dragged Alara into Ravenmoor belonged to her stepmother. Cordelia Voss held the other end like a leash, and she smiled the whole way up the mountain road. She smiled at the gate guards. She smiled at the great oak doors. She smiled at the pack that had gathered to watch a girl get handed over like a sack of grain. That smile never once reached her eyes. Alara had learned years ago what that smile meant. It meant Cordelia was about to profit and someone else was about to bleed. Here's the thing about the debt. It was never Alara's. Her father, before he died, had borrowed silver and men and grain from 3 different packs to keep his lands. When he passed, Cordelia inherited the lands, the coin, and every clean thing he'd built. What she didn't inherit was the honor to pay her own bills. So she found a colder way. She'd offer the Mountain King a young bride, wipe the ledgers clean, and be rid of the stepdaughter she'd never wanted under her roof. 2 problems solved with 1 chain, and the beauty of it to a woman like Cordelia was that it cost her nothing she valued. Alara had walked the whole climb in silence. She'd counted the switchbacks. She'd watched the pines get taller and the air get thinner, and she'd told herself the same thing she always told herself. Whatever's coming, you can survive it. You've survived worse. She believed that right up until the great doors opened, and she saw how many of them were waiting. Kellen Thornwood, Cordelia announced, and she dropped a mocking little bow. I bring you a wife, pretty, obedient, yours in exchange for the marks my late husband owed your house. A fair trade for a king. She paused and her voice dripped, even a king in a chair. The insult landed in the room like a slap. Alara heard the pack shift and mutter. She waited for the king to roar, to strike, to do what powerful men did when they were mocked in front of their own people. But Kellen Thornwood did none of that. He just looked at Cordelia the way you'd look at bad weather, something you'd wait out. He was not old. That surprised her. 30, maybe. His shoulders were broad, his forearms thick with corded muscle, and a heavy blanket lay across legs that did not move. A long scar ran from his jaw down into his collar. His eyes were the gray of storm cloud, and they were steady, and they were patient in a way that made Alara's skin prickle. This was not a man waiting to lose his throne. This was a man waiting for something else entirely. An ambush had done this to him. Everyone knew the story. 2 winters back, riding a mountain pass, Kellen and his mate had been cornered by a raiding party. His legs were crushed under a rockslide the raiders triggered. His mate, Ussold, was killed in front of him. He dragged himself 6 miles through snow to bring her body home. He had not been seen to walk since. The packs had watched and waited and whispered. A wolf king who could not stand was, in their eyes, a wounded thing to be picked apart. They said it openly now, in taverns down in the lowlands. They said the mountain would change hands before the next thaw. They said it the way men say things they've decided are already true. Take the cuffs off her, Kellen said. His voice was quiet. It carried anyway. A big man beside him, gray-bearded, an old warrior named Doran, stepped down and unlocked the iron from Alara's wrist. She rubbed the raw skin and stayed on her knees because she did not yet know the rules of this place, and staying low had kept her alive under Cordelia's roof for 6 years. Stand, Kellen told her. You're not a dog, don't kneel to me. She stood, Cordelia laughed, delighted. Sentimental. That'll serve you well when the northern packs come to take your crown, Cripple, and they will come. Everyone can smell it. She turned on her heel, silk snapping. The debt's paid. Enjoy your prize. And she was gone, back down the mountain, leaving her stepdaughter in a stranger's hall with nothing but the clothes on her back. Silence settled. The pack stared at Alara. She stared at the floor. She had come here expecting cruelty, and cruelty at least she understood. What she didn't understand was the way the broken king studied her, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve slowly and carefully, with all the time in the world. "You have a name," Kellen said. It wasn't a question. "Ilara. You didn't ask to come here." "No. And you're not going to thank me for the chain being off, or curse me for the marriage. You're just going to wait and see what kind of man I am." A faint line touched the corner of his mouth. "Smart girl." He gestured, and Doran led her away to a small room with a real bed and a window that looked out over the black pines. Nobody hit her. Nobody threatened her, and somehow that unsettled her more than a beating would have. She lay awake most of that first night, listening to the mountain wind, wondering what the price of all this kindness would turn out to be. Because in her experience, kindness always had a price. She just hadn't found it yet. Twice she got up and tried the door, half expecting it locked. It wasn't. That frightened her more than a bolt would have. She found something else instead. The next morning, before the hall stirred, Alara went looking for water and got lost in the cold stone corridors of Ravenmoor. That's how she found the kennel. And in the kennel, chained to a ring in the wall, was the biggest, ugliest, most frightening animal she had ever seen. It was a wolfhound. Gray, scarred, the size of a small pony, with one torn ear and a low growl that started the moment she stepped through the door. Old scar tissue crossed its muzzle. Its ribs showed. A serving boy hovered at the far end of the room, tossing meat toward it from a safe distance, clearly terrified. "Don't," the boy hissed. "That's Bram. He belonged to the king's mate. He's killed 2 handlers since she died. Nobody can touch him. The king won't put him down, but nobody can get near enough to care for him. He'll take your hand off." Alara looked at the animal, and under the scars and the snarl and the raised hackles, she saw something she recognized instantly because she had lived it. She saw a creature that had lost the one person who was kind to it and had decided quite reasonably that the whole world could go to hell. She sat down on the cold floor, well out of range, and said nothing. She just stayed, for an hour, then 2. She didn't reach. She didn't coax. She didn't even look at him straight on because she remembered how it felt to be stared at like a problem. She simply refused to leave, the way she wished, long ago, someone had refused to leave her. The growl eventually stopped. Then it started again when she shifted her weight and stopped again when she went still. That's how it went back and forth for most of the morning. The dog watched her. She watched the wall. And when the boy came back at noon, he found the girl still sitting there and the killer wolfhound lying down with his enormous scarred head 3 feet from her knee, and neither of them looking away. Word of that reached the king by evening. Alara did not know it yet, but she had just done the one thing in Ravenmoor that mattered most to Kellen Thornwood, and she'd done it without being asked, without hope of reward, when she thought no one was watching. That, more than any chain or any debt, was the moment everything began to turn. Over the next days, Alara went back to the kennel every morning. She brought Bram water and cleaned his wounds and slowly taught him that a hand could come near without bringing pain. The first time she touched him, he went rigid, and she felt the growl through her palm like thunder under the earth. She didn't pull back. She just waited it out, the way she'd waited out everything. By the end of the week, he leaned into her hand. She learned to unhook his chain and let him pad beside her through the corridors. The pack gave her a wide berth, half from fear of the dog, half from confusion about the strange new bride who preferred a killer wolfhound to the company of people. Kellen started sending for her, not to a bedchamber, never that. He'd have her wheeled beside him in his study while he pored over maps and ledgers and letters sealed with the crests of a dozen packs. He talked to her the way you talk to someone you've decided is intelligent. He asked her opinion on the grain stores and the border patrols, and which of the outlying farms were being squeezed too hard. At first, she gave careful, empty answers, the kind that couldn't get her hit. Then one night she told him the truth, that his tax on the Western Valley was starving families who'd done nothing but be born on the wrong side of a river, and instead of striking her, he went quiet and then he changed the tax, just like that. She sat there afterward, stunned, waiting for the catch. There wasn't one. Ussold used to tell me the same, he said afterward, staring at the fire. That I saw the map and not the people on it. It was the only time he said his dead mate's name to her. He said it like a wound that had scarred but never closed. They fell into a rhythm after that. She'd read the letters aloud because his eyes tired in the low light, and he'd tell her which alphas were lying and which were only frightened, and how to tell the difference. She learned more about power in those evenings than Cordelia had taught her in 6 years of watching from corners. Power, Kellen said, is mostly patience. Most men can't stand to be underestimated. They have to prove themselves right away, and that's how you learn everything about them. He said it lightly. She'd remember it later and understand it wasn't light at all. Bram took to sleeping across Kellen's study door. The old warhound would let no one else near his master anymore, no one but Alara. And the king watched the two of them, the broken dog and the bartered girl, and something in his storm-gray eyes began to look almost like hope. It couldn't last. Alara knew it couldn't. She could feel the mountain holding its breath. The letter came on a gray afternoon, carried by a rider whose horse was near dead from the climb. Doran read it aloud in the great hall, and his old voice shook with anger. 3 packs of the North, the Hallows, the Drennan, and the Vane had formed an alliance. They were coming to Ravenmoor. They named it a council, a gathering of alphas to discuss the succession of the mountain throne. Everyone in that hall knew what the pretty word meant. They were coming to take the crown off a cripple who couldn't defend it, and to divide his lands and his hound and his new bride between them. Kellen listened to all of it without a flicker of surprise. When Doran finished, the old warrior slammed the letter down. We should ride out to meet them on the pass. Choose the ground. Not sit here waiting to be slaughtered in our own hall like sheep in a pen. His hand was on his sword. Half the guards in the room had theirs there too. Give the word and I'll take 20 men to the high pass tonight. We die on our feet at least. We die like wolves. No, Kellen said, we let them come. We let them walk right in through the front door, every one of them. He looked, of all places, at Alara. It's almost time. Doran stared at him. Almost time for what? For them to burn us where we sit. Trust me one more winter, old friend, Kellen said. You've trusted me through worse. And Doran, who had bled for this king and this king's father, went quiet, though his jaw stayed tight. Alara watched the exchange and felt the ground shift under her without knowing why. There was a thing here she couldn't see, a card face down on the table. She'd learned to notice when a man was holding one. She just couldn't tell yet what it was. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She went to find him and found him alone in the dark study, the fire low, Bram's great head resting on his knee. And here is the part I need you to hold on to, because after this nothing was calm again. For that 1 hour, everything was quiet. Kellen poured her a cup of warm cider and told her softly that whatever happened at the council, she would be given a horse and safe passage south, away from all of it. He'd already arranged it. He stroked the old dog's scarred ear. Bram sighed and closed his eyes. Alara sat by the fire with the broken king and the mended dog, and for the length of that hour in the deep quiet of the mountain, It felt like the worst was already behind them. It felt, God help her, like peace. She let herself believe it. That was her mistake. The doors of the great hall did not open. They exploded inward. Both oak slabs blew off their hinges and crashed to the stone, and 30 armed wolves poured through the gap before the morning council was ever meant to begin. The northern alphas had not come to talk. They'd come to end it. At their head strode a giant of a man in black furs, Garrick Vane, broad as a doorway, a war axe over his shoulder, and he was already grinning when he saw Kellen sitting in his chair on the raised floor. "No speeches," Garrick boomed. "No council. We came a day early, Crippled, because a day is all the warning a corpse deserves." His men fanned out, blades drawn, cutting off every exit. Doran and the handful of Ravenmoor guards drew steel, but they were outnumbered 4-1, and everyone in that hall could count. And here's where the whole story changed its shape. Because up to that second, Alara had thought this was a fight about a throne, about one king and 3 greedy rivals and who got to sit in the tall chair. It wasn't. Garrick's men weren't spreading out to fight the guards. They were spreading out to seal the room. Nobody in, nobody out, nobody left to carry the tale. "When it's done," Garrick told his alphas, loud enough for all to hear, loud enough that he wanted the Ravenmoor pack to hear it too and feel the fear. "We burn the hall with them all inside. Every guard, every servant, the old man, the girl, no witnesses, no martyrs. Just a fire and a story we get to tell however we like." He pointed the axe at Kellen. "The mountain forgets a king who dies quiet in the dark." That was the new game, not a duel for a crown, an extermination, and they'd sealed the doors to make sure of it. Garrick's gaze slid to Alara standing frozen at the edge of the raised floor. His grin widened. Though maybe not the girl right away. Vain men have appetites. His alphas laughed. Alara's blood turned to ice. She looked at Kellen, at the man in the chair who could not stand, could not run, could not fight. And she understood in a single sick lurch that there was no horse waiting for her, no safe road south, no way out of this room that wasn't through 30 armed killers. "Now, before I tell you what Kellen Thornwood did next, do me one favor. If you're still with me, if your heart's pounding the way mine is telling this, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. Because what happened in that sealed hall is the reason people still tell this story, and I want to tell you the rest of it. All right, here it is." Kellen Thornwood laughed. It wasn't loud. It rolled out of him low and easy, and it did something to that room that 30 drawn blades hadn't done. It made the northern alphas go quiet, because a cornered cripple doesn't laugh. A dead man doesn't laugh. And every wolf in that hall, deep in the animal part of their brains, felt the first cold finger of doubt. "Garrick," Kellen said, wiping his eye like a man enjoying a good joke, "I have been waiting almost 2 years for this exact morning. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get men like you to walk willingly into a sealed room? You have to look weak. You have to look finished. You have to let the whole mountain watch you crawl through the snow and never stand up again, and let them talk and let the word spread, and let the greedy ones, the truly greedy, the ones with no honor at all, come to you." He leaned forward in the chair. "I didn't come out to meet you on the pass because I wanted you inside, all of you, in one room, where I could see exactly who you were." "You're a broken thing in a chair," Garrick snarled, but the certainty had left his voice. "My legs are broken," Kellen agreed. "That part was never a lie. The rockslide took them, and it took Ussold, and no amount of anything is bringing either back. I will never stand as a man again." He reached down and gripped the arms of his chair. "But tell me something, Garrick Vane, in all your grand planning, in all your certainty that a wolf who cannot walk is a wolf who cannot fight." His gray eyes lifted, and now they were not patient at all. They were burning. "Did it ever once occur to you that a wolf king does not fight as a man?" And Kellen Thornwood shifted. I have heard this part told 100 ways and none of them do it justice, so I'll just tell you plain. The change tore through him in a single heartbeat. The blanket ripped away. The chair shattered under him into kindling. Where a crippled man had sat, there rose a wolf, but not a wolf like any in that room, not like the lean fighters Garrick brought. This was something out of the oldest stories. Black as a starless sky, shoulders higher than a standing man, jaws that could take a horse's neck. The shift heals what the shift can heal, and it takes what it takes, and a wolf does not walk on ruined human legs. A wolf runs on 4 whole ones. Kellen's beast was unbroken. It had always been unbroken. He had spent 2 years letting the entire mountain believe the wolf had died with his legs, so that his enemies would grow bold and careless, and come to him in a room he could seal from the inside as easily as they could seal it from the out. The great black wolf hit the front rank of Garrick's men before they'd finished gasping. The hall became chaos, but it was not the chaos of a doomed king's last stand. It was the chaos of a trap closing, because Kellen had not been idle those 2 years. Doran gave a sharp whistle, and from behind the tapestries and the side doors came the Ravenmore pack in full. Not the handful of guards Garrick had counted, but 40 seasoned wolves who'd been hidden and waiting, wolves loyal to a king they'd watched play dead to draw out the rot. The sealed doors that were meant to trap the Ravenmore folk now trapped the Northerners inside with a monster. And Bram, the old scarred wolfhound, had been lying by the study door, and when the black wolf roared, Bram answered. 2 years of grief and rage came off that animal like a storm. He went straight for the men closest to Alara, the vain men with the appetites, and he was old and half-starved, and he did not care. He took one down at the throat before the man could raise his blade. Alara screamed his name and grabbed a fallen sword. She'd never held one. It was too heavy. She didn't care either. And she put her back to the wall beside the dog she'd saved, and the dog who was now saving her. Garrick Vane swung his axe at the black wolf and buried it in nothing but air, because a beast that size should not have been that fast. Kellen's jaws closed on the axe arm, and the giant went down screaming. The 2 other alphas, Hallow and Drennan, saw in an instant that the story they'd been told was a lie from the first word, that they'd marched into a killing floor of their own choosing, and they broke. They ran for the sealed doors and clawed at them and found no way out, because they had built the cage themselves. It did not take long after that. It never does once the fear turns. The northern wolves who threw down their blades and dropped to their bellies, Kellen let live. He was a king, not a butcher, and he'd made his point in blood already. The ones who kept fighting did not see the sun. Garrick Vane, pinned under a paw the size of a shield, looked up into the eyes of the cripple he'd come to burn, and whatever he saw there, he stopped talking for the first time in his loud, greedy life. When it was over, the great black wolf stood in the center of his hall, chest heaving, surrounded by the wreckage of everyone who'd thought him weak. Then slowly, he shifted back. And here's the part that broke Alara's heart even as it filled it. The man who returned could not stand. He came back into a body with ruined legs, and he half fell to the stone, catching himself on his scarred hands, a king kneeling in the aftermath of his own victory because his body gave him no other choice. Alara dropped the sword and ran to him. She got under his arm without being asked, the way she'd once refused to leave a killer dog, and she held him up. Bram limped over, bleeding from a gash along his flank, and pressed his huge scarred head against them both. The 3 of them in the ruined hall, in the smoke and the silence, held each other up, and every surviving wolf in Ravenmore and every beaten alpha of the North went to one knee, not because they were ordered to, because they finally understood what they'd been looking at all along. The story of that morning went down the mountain faster than any horse. By the time it reached the lowland packs, it had grown in the telling, the way true things do. The broken king who wasn't broken, the wolf as black as night. The girl who'd been traded like livestock and had picked up a sword instead of running. The scarred old warhound that no one could tame, fighting at his master's side. People argued over the details for years. They didn't argue over the point. The mountain had a king again, and only a fool would test him now. Garrick Vane and the two other alphas lived. Kellen spared them on purpose, and it was a colder mercy than killing. He sent them home stripped of their warbands, their pride ground to powder, to carry the truth to every pack that had whispered about the cripple of Ravenmoor. Let them tell it themselves, he said. Let them explain how they'd walked into a sealed room to burn a helpless man and crawled out on their bellies. No punishment he could invent would sting worse than that. He did not spare Cordelia's debt, though. That's a smaller story, but Alara liked it best. A month after the haul, a rider went down the mountain and came back up with the ledgers of the Voss estate, every mark her father had truly owed, and every mark Cordelia had skimmed, forged, and stolen in his name. Turned out the debt her stepmother had paid by trading away Alara had never been real. Cordelia had invented it to be rid of her and pocket the difference. Kellen laid the proof before the Lowland Council, and Cordelia lost the lands, the coin, and the last shred of the reputation she'd built her whole life on lies. She ended her days in a cold, rented room, and Alara, when she heard, felt neither triumph nor pity. She felt nothing at all, which is its own kind of freedom. Alara stayed. Not because of the marriage bargain, Kellen tore that up himself, standing witness before the pack that no debt bound her to Ravenmoor and she was free to ride south with a full purse whenever she wished. He told her that plainly in front of everyone so there could be no doubt and no pressure. She listened to the whole speech. Then she told him she was staying and it was her choice, and if he argued with her about it, she'd set Bram on him. The hall laughed. Kellen didn't argue. They were mated within the year. Not out of debt, not out of pity, not out of any bargain struck over silver. Out of the slow, real thing that had grown in that fire-lit study, between a man who saw people and not just maps, and a girl who'd learned to stay when everything told her to run. He never walked again. That was true to the end. Some mornings the pain in his legs was bad, and on those days Alara would sit with him and read the ledgers aloud and argue about the Western Valley tax, which he'd cut twice more on her word. On the good days he'd shift and run the high pines with the pack, black against the snow, faster than any wolf on the mountain, and she'd watch from the ridge with the old gray wolfhound at her side and understand exactly why he'd let them all underestimate him for so long. A king who's been thought weak knows precisely who his friends are. There is a strange, hard gift in that. Most powerful men never learn it. Kellen learned it in the snow, dragging the body of the woman he loved, and he never forgot it. Bram lived 3 more years. Good years, fat and warm, sleeping across the study door where no enemy would ever again come through. When he finally went, he went in his sleep with his scarred head on Alara's knee and the fire low, the same as that first quiet night. They buried him under the black pines where the pack runs, and Kellen, who did not weep for Garrick Vane or for the throne or for his own ruined legs, wept for the old dog that everyone else had wanted to put down. Alara held him while he did. She understood. Bram was the last living thing that had loved Ushold, and now that too was gone, and grief, she'd learned, doesn't close. It only scars. Years later, when Alara was mistress of the whole mountain and their children ran wild through the halls of Ravenmoor, a young bride came up the road one day at the end of a chain, traded away by a cruel family to settle a debt she hadn't made. Alara went out to the gate herself. She unlocked the cuff with her own hands. And she said the first true thing anyone had ever said to her in that place. "You're not a dog," she told the frightened girl. "Don't kneel here." Nobody kneels here who doesn't want to. Then she took her inside out of the cold and gave her warm cider by the fire and let her sit as long as she needed with nothing asked in return. Because that, in the end, is what the whole story was ever really about. Not the Black Wolf, not the sealed hall, not the crown or the debt or the 3 fool alphas who came to burn a king and crawled home broken. It was about a bartered girl who chose to be kind to a scarred animal no one else would touch when she thought no one was watching, and a scarred king who was watching, and who knew, better than anyone alive, exactly what that kind of quiet, unrewarded mercy was worth. They'd both been thrown away. They'd both been counted out. And they built out of 2 broken and discarded things the strongest house on the mountain. Kellen Thornwood ruled Ravenmore for 30 more years. Nobody ever called him the Cripple again. They called him the Wolf who waited, and the girl in the chain who became his queen, well, they stopped needing chains at Ravenmore entirely. She saw to that.